I'm not much for talking about myself. If you ask anyone in this town who I am, I'll just tell you that's Old Man Carver, runs the pizza place on Main Street. And that's fine with me. I like it that way. My name's Samuel Carver, though only my bills and my birth certificate use the full thing. I'm 62 years old, got hair that used to be black but turned gray over the years, and a face that people say looks like it was carved from stone. I don't know if that's a good thing. My knees don't work as well as they used to, and my hands shake a little if I hold something too long, but I get by. I run a little pizzeria just down the block from a pharmacy, place I call Carver's Pies. Catchy name, right? It's not much, but it's mine. The ovens are old, the tables are scratched, and the sign outside has been half flickering for years. I've been meaning to fix it, but I always find a reason not to. Adds character, I say. Business is steady, enough to keep the lights on and pay the bills, but not enough for anything fancy. That's fine by me too. The folks that come in are a mix of regulars and out-of-towners passing through. Small town life, you know. The regulars are mostly older folk, retirees, widows, people who've been here long enough to know every crack in the sidewalk. They sit at the same tables, order the same pies, and leave the same tips. And I don't mind. I like consistency, predictability. Then there's Sammy. She's my waitress. I call her a waitress, but truth be told, she does a bit of everything. Waits tables, mops the floors, helps me close up. She's got this energy about her, always smiling, always moving like she's got a dozen places to be and not enough time to get there. Young thing, at least she seems young. She won't tell me her age, but she's got that kind of youthful glow that makes me feel like an old fossil. She keeps the place lively, and the customers like her. That's good for business. People around town don't know much about me beyond the pizzeria. They don't ask, and I don't tell. Not one for small talk. Sure, I'll nod at the folks when I pass them on the street, maybe say a quick, "Hey, how's it going?" if I'm feeling sociable. That's about it. People respect that. Small towns are good like that. Everyone knows everyone. But they also know when to mind their own damn business. Most nights after we close up, I'll sit in the back booth with a slice of pepperoni and a cup of coffee. Yeah, coffee with pizza. Don't knock it till you try it. Sammy will wipe down the counters, humming some tune that's always just a little off-key. It's a quiet life. Peaceful, even. And I'm grateful for it. But it wasn't always this way. The regulars keep me grounded. They're a strange lot, but then again, so am I. One of them is a guy named Jameson. He's in his 30s now, but I remember him when he was just a kid, maybe 10 or 11. He comes in every Friday after work, orders a meat lover's pizza, and sits at the booth by the window. Never fails. He said good evening last Friday as he walked in, the little bell over the door jingling. He always calls me Mr. Carver, no matter how many times I tell him, just call me Sam. I think it's his way of showing respect. Jameson's a good man, works over at the hardware store. Sturdy built, friendly face, but there's a quiet seriousness about him. Most people in town think he's just a regular guy, but I know better. I know where that seriousness comes from. I met Jameson 20 years ago in a forest outside of town. Back then, I wasn't just the old man slinging pizzas. I was, well, something else. Jameson had been camping with his parents when he wandered off. Kids do that sometimes. They think they're invincible. Only Jameson didn't find his way back to the tent. Something found him first. A troll. Big, ugly thing, all warts and teeth and hunger. Now, trolls are nasty creatures. Not too bright and mean as hell. They like to snatch people and drag them back to their dens where, well, Let's just say it doesn't end up well for their captives. By the time I tracked Jameson down, he was tied up in some mossy pit, his face streaked with tears and dirt. The troll was sharpening its claws on a rock, humming this low, awful tune. Trolls love to hum. It's their way of savoring the meal before it happens. Now, I didn't have much to work with that night. No weapons, no fancy traps, just a pocket knife and my wits. But back then, that was enough. Now, trolls are big and strong, but they are also very dumb. I distracted it with a few loud bangs. Trolls hate loud noises. Then dropped a net laced with wolfsbane right over its head. Wolfsbane burns their skin, slows them down. Wasn't pretty, but it got the job done. I carried Jameson back to his parents that night. He didn't say a word the whole way, just held on tight. His parents thanked me through tears, but I didn't stick around for the gratitude. I never did. I just made sure they got home safe and I moved on to the next thing. But Jameson didn't forget. He shows up here every week, orders the same pizza, and we talk. He doesn't bring up the troll much. He doesn't need to. Then there's Kellyanne. She's a singer. At least she likes to think she is. She's in her late 20s, with bright red hair and a voice that could probably stop traffic. Not in a good way. She's loud and she knows it. She comes in every other week, usually after one of her performances, and orders a small veggie pizza, always with extra olives. "Hey, Sam," she called out last time, plopping herself down at the counter like she owned the place. "Guess what? I'm thinking about singing for you tonight." I rolled my eyes. "Kellyanne, if you start singing, I will throw you out myself." She laughed. That big, hearty laugh of hers. "Oh, don't be like that. You should be grateful I've still got my voice." I'm starting to regret saving it, I shot back, but I couldn't help smirking. She knew I didn't mean it. Now, Kellyanne owes me for more than just pizza. About 5 years ago, she got tangled up with a siren, not the kind that sings from rocks to lure sailors to their doom. This one was subtler. It found her after one of her gigs, charmed her with sweet words and promises of fame. Sirens are thieves at their core. They don't want money or jewelry. They want what makes you, you. In Kellyanne's case, it wanted her voice. When she came to me, her voice was already starting to fade. She could barely speak above a whisper. And I knew what I had to do. Now, sirens are tricky, but they're not invincible. It took a silver mirror, a few drops of salt water, and a verse from an old song I learned decades ago. The siren tried to fight back, but I mean, come on. It didn't stand a chance. By morning, Kellyanne had her voice back. I told her to keep quiet about it, but she has never been good at listening. Now she's here every other week, reminding me just how loud she can be. And then there's Darwin. Darwin's an older guy, probably in his 70s. Still sharp as a tack, though. He used to run a farm just outside of town, a big piece of land that has been in his family for generations. He's a quiet man, keeps to himself, but when he does talk, you listen. Darwin comes in every Sunday, orders a large pepperoni, and stays for hours, just sitting at the corner table with a cup of black coffee. Darwin's land was haunted, though he never liked using that word. Plagued, he called it. Crow demons, to be specific. Nasty things. They're not demons in the biblical sense, more like spirits twisted by regret and anger. They'd roost in the trees around his property, cawing and screaming, tearing at his crops, scaring off his workers. When Darwin came to me, he was desperate. The farm was all he had, and he was on the brink of losing it. I spent 3 nights out there, preparing a ritual to cleanse the land. Crow demons. They're tied to the past. They feed on unresolved pain. That farm, before his family got it, had been a plantation and had its share of bad history. And those regrets were fueling the demons. The ritual wasn't easy. It involved digging up old artifacts, burning sage, and chanting words I hadn't spoken in years. But it worked. By the time the sun rose on the third day, the land was quiet, and the demons were gone. Darwin doesn't say much about it when he comes in, but I can tell he's grateful. He always leaves a $20 tip no matter how small his order is. He doesn't need to say thank you, it's in his actions. Jameson, Kellyanne, Darwin, they're more than just regulars. They're reminders of a life I used to live, of the things I used to do. They sit at my tables, eat my pizza, and share stories about their days. To anyone else, they're just customers. To me, they're proof that the old man behind the counters was once something else, something more. But, that was a long time ago. These days, I'm just Samuel Carver, the guy who makes pizzas, and I'm okay with that. Monster hunting, it's not what it used to be. I think about that sometimes late at night, sitting in the back booth with my coffee. The world has changed, and so has the job. Back in my day, there weren't many of us. Monster hunters, I mean. You couldn't just sign up for it like a job at the post office. It wasn't something you picked off a career list or a path you stumbled into by accident. It called to you, and you had to answer. We were few, but we were good. Not just skilled, but dedicated. It wasn't about muscle or brute strength, though that does help sometimes. It was about being clever, resourceful. You had to know how to read a situation, how to think 10 steps ahead. A monster hunter wasn't just someone who fought monsters. We were protectors, keepers of the balance between the world of men and the world of things that shouldn't be. The old ways taught us that monsters weren't just beasts to be killed. They were symptoms of something larger, signs of something broken. If you killed the monster without fixing the root problem, another one would take its place. Other times, the monsters weren't just like any other animal. They were here long before us and would be long after we were gone. And that's why we didn't rush in with guns blazing. We studied. We learned. We respected the creatures we hunted, even if sometimes we had to put them down in the end. But nowadays it's different. The organization that trains and selects hunters, it used to be exclusive, careful about who they chose. They didn't just look for people who were strong or brave. They looked for people who had the right kind of mind, the right kind of heart. People who understood the weight of the job, but that's changed. Now it seems like they let anyone do it. The standards have dropped, they really have. And with that, so has the quality of the hunters they send out. Now it's a career, a way to make a name for yourself, to gain fame and bask in the admiration of others. I have seen hunters who treat it like a parade, bragging about their exploits in bars and town halls, spinning tales for applause and recognition. They sign their names on contracts as if they're heroes from some grand storybook, more concerned with their legacy than with the work they're doing. Makes me sick. The job was never supposed to be about that. It's not a spectacle. It's a calling. And the worst part, they've forgotten the old ways. The knowledge, the rituals, the understanding that took generations to build. It's slipping away. Why learn how to bind a spirit with an iron ring when you can just blow it up with a grenade? Why bother with protective wards when you've got a shotgun loaded with silver pellets? They don't understand. It's not just about killing the monster. It's about keeping the balance. Balance. That's the key. Most monsters aren't evil by nature. They're just doing what they're meant to do. They hunt, they feed, they protect their territories. It's humans who throw things out of balance. We build our cities where we shouldn't. We dig up things that were meant to stay buried. We break the rules. And then we act surprised when something comes to remind us that maybe we're not the ones in charge. The old hunters knew this. They taught us to respect the natural order, to tread carefully. We didn't kill unless there was no other choice. If a monster could be reasoned with, if it could be relocated or calmed, that's what we'd do. Killing was the last resort. And when we did kill it, it wasn't for bounty or fame. It was to protect the balance, to make sure the world kept turning the way it was supposed to. I don't see that anymore. I see kids getting picked for the wrong reasons, because they're flashy or strong or they talk a good game. I see hunters turning on each other, fighting over territory and contracts. I see people chasing fame instead of doing the work, and I see monsters suffering for it. Creatures that could have been left alone, destroyed because someone wanted to make a name for themselves. I know, I keep going on about this. But it wasn't like this when I was young. We had our rivalries, sure. Hunters are a proud bunch. We do like to show off now and then. But we understood the stakes. We knew what we were fighting for. The old ways weren't perfect, but they worked. They kept people safe. They kept the monsters in their place, and they kept us, those of us who answered the call, grounded, humble. Sometimes I think about stepping back into the game, showing these kids how it's really done. But then I remember why I retired in the first place. I gave everything I had to this life. I bled for it, sacrificed for it. Now, I'm just a tired old man running a pizza shop. And I've earned my rest. Let the new hunters have their fame, their money, their gadgets, and firepower. Let them make their mistakes. The world will teach them the lessons they need to learn, just like it taught me. And maybe, just maybe, few of them will figure it out. And they'll find the balance again. At least I hope they will. The bell over the door jingled one evening as I wiped down the counter. I looked up and saw him, a young man, maybe mid-30s, with messy brown hair and a cocky grin. He had the kind of energy that filled the room, whether you wanted it to or not. He wore a leather jacket that looked a little too clean for someone who worked in my old line of business. He glanced around at the pizzeria, nodding to himself, then strolled right up to the counter. "You must be Carver," he said, leaning one arm on the counter like he owned the place. "That depends. Who's asking?" I said. "Name's McCarthy. I have heard a lot about you." I set the rag down and looked him over. "Congratulations." He laughed. A loud, confident laugh. The kind that's either disarming or annoying, depending on your mood. I wasn't sure which it was yet. "You're a legend, you know that? Old man Carver, the best monster hunter of his time. People still tell stories about you, man." "Stories, huh? They ever tell you how I'm retired?" "Yeah. And I'm here to tell you that retirement's overrated." I raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. He took that as an invitation to keep talking. "I need your help. There's a witch. Nasty piece of work. She's been terrorizing a little town about 3 hours from here. People are disappearing. Kids mostly. And we've traced it back to her." I frowned. Witches weren't common, but when one showed up, it was always bad news. They didn't just kill people. They corrupted everything around them. McCarthy admitted that the organization had plenty of hunters, but this was different. The witch they were dealing with was far stronger than anything he'd encountered before. He was the one assigned to handle it, but he confessed, with a trace of unease, that he was out of his depth. That admission was why he'd come to me in the first place. I crossed my arms and leaned back against the counter, letting his words hang in the air. It didn't change my stance. He'd picked the wrong man for the job. My time in that life was done, and I had no intention of going back. "Come on, Carver, this isn't just about you. People are getting taken. Kids are disappearing. You can't just sit here slinging pizzas while that's happening," McCarthy said. I didn't say anything. He wasn't wrong, but he didn't understand. Monster hunting wasn't something you just jumped back into after decades on the sidelines. It was dangerous, unpredictable, and if you weren't sharp, if you made even one mistake with a witch, things would go bad. "I'm not interested. Good luck with your case," I said. McCarthy let out a sigh and ran a hand through his hair. "You know, they said you'd be like this. Stubborn, grumpy, not easily impressed." "Sounds like they got it right," I replied. "But they also said you care. That you're the kind of guy who can't stand to see innocent people get hurt. Especially kids." I stared at him for a long moment. "All right." His face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. "Really?" "Yeah, really," I said, holding up a finger to stop his celebration. "But on one condition." "Yeah, name it." "We do this my way," I said firmly. "None of that newfangled crap the kids rely on these days. No fancy weapons, no insta-tech. We do it the old way, or we don't do it at all, you got it?" McCarthy nodded so fast I thought his head might fall off. Yeah, I got it. Whatever you say." "Good." I motioned for him to follow me. "All right, come on, if we're doing this, we need to get some supplies." He followed me to the back of the pizzeria, where I unlocked a door that led to a small storage room. To most people, it looked like a place to stash extra pizza boxes and cleaning supplies. But behind a false wall was something else entirely. A collection of tools and relics from my monster hunting days. McCarthy let out a low whistle as I pushed the false wall aside. "Impressive." Yeah, don't touch anything," I warned him, grabbing a few items off the shelves. He grinned, clearly not offended. "Fair enough. What's first on the list?" I glanced at him, my expression as serious as ever. "Well, first, you keep your mouth shut and you listen. And second, well, we get ready to hunt a witch." The storage room was cramped, but everything was exactly where I'd left it. Dust covered the shelves, but the tools were in perfect condition, untouched by time. They were better than the fancy, overcomplicated gear hunters use these days. I pulled out a battered leather bag and started filling it with what we'd need. Bundles of dried herbs, silver tools, and other essentials. McCarthy leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching as I worked. He explained the situation as I moved. The trouble had started about 3 months ago. Strange weather rolled in. thick fog, sudden storms, and soon after, people in town began getting sick. Crops withered in the fields. Then about a month ago, kids started going missing. All of it had been traced back to a cabin deep in the woods. The townsfolk spoke of lights flickering in the trees at night and strange sounds coming from there. I paused, letting his words sink in. Strange sounds weren't much to go on, but at least he knew where the cabin was. He admitted he'd tried going there once. She hadn't been home, but the place was crawling with wards, enough to keep him out entirely. That wasn't surprising. Wards were like fences, designed to repel intruders or trap whatever was inside. They weren't something you could just walk through unprepared, and McCarthy clearly hadn't been. He hadn't known what he was dealing with, which was why he'd gotten nowhere. As I grabbed a set of iron nails from a box, McCarthy added that the witch had a familiar, a crow. The bird had been spotted following people around town, watching them. It was common for witches to use animals like that, spies and messengers, extensions of their power. But crows aren't always bad. I met a good one a few years back, and it still comes and visits me from time to time. It's like it's checking on me to make sure I'm still here. Every time that crow comes to visit, I grab a slice of cheese pizza, throw some Tic Tacs on it. I don't know why, but it loves those. And I sit outside with a beer as it eats on the ground next to me. That bird has saved my life more than once. But that's a different story for another time. Now, the more I listened, the clearer it became that this witch was no amateur. She'd built layers of protection and influence, all of it rooted in careful, deliberate work. McCarthy, for all his effort, was in way over his head. As I said, crows are standard fare for witches, serving as spies and messengers, deeply tied to their magic. McCarthy had clearly tried to take it out, but it hadn't worked. It was no surprise. The bird wasn't just a regular crow. It was a part of her, connected to the witch in a way that made it much harder to kill without the right tools or knowledge. From the look on his face, it was clear he wasn't happy about the reminder of his failure, but he kept quiet. I grabbed a silver flask from the shelf, filled it with holy water from a jug in the corner. The familiar weight of the flask in my hand was a small comfort. It was just another piece of the work that McCarthy was beginning to see wasn't as simple as he might have thought. Now here's your first lesson. You don't fight a witch head on unless you want to die. Prep work matters more than anything else. You make the battlefield yours before you even see her face. Or you die, I said, holding up the flask. I slung the bag over my shoulder and nodded toward the door. All right, come on. We got work to do. Outside, I opened the back of my old truck and started loading supplies. McCarthy followed, quieter than usual after our talk in the storage room. I packed a bundle of salt, a length of rope, and a few jars of powdered iron into the truck bed, everything we'd need for what was ahead. McCarthy hung back, watching. The confidence he'd walked in with earlier noticeably dimmed. He seemed unsure, maybe even a little out of his depth. He kept quiet. Witches weren't simple enemies. They were clever and dangerous. And this mission wasn't something you could rush into unprepared. Once the truck was packed, we climbed in and I started the engine. The old truck rumbled to life, steady and reliable. As we drove, I thought about what McCarthy had told me. The wards around the witch's cabin weren't just for keeping people out. They were designed to trap something inside. Probably the kids. Wards like those are not easy to break. They needed to be carefully dismantled. One wrong move turning the whole thing into a disaster. McCarthy sat silently beside me, his usual cocky attitude replaced by focus. He seemed to be taking it all in for the first time. When we reached the town, it was quiet. The streets were empty, and the houses were shut up tight. It wasn't hard to see that the people here were scared of what was lurking just outside their reach. We parked the truck in the center of town. We got to work. McCarthy took the bundle of sage and the tin of salt, moving methodically to mark the perimeter as instructed. Small pinches of salt were placed at key corners, and the smoldering sage left trails of pale smoke that hung in the still air. Meanwhile, I drove iron stakes into the ground at specific points, their protective runes still visible despite the years of wear. These stakes, carved long ago when my hands were steadier, formed the backbone of the wards we were setting. The process wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. Every detail mattered. Every placement, every line drawn. In the old days, preparation was half the battle, and I treated this no differently. McCarthy moved briskly but carefully while I worked with a precision that only years of experience could bring. Each step tightened the grip of the defenses we were weaving, making the space ours rather than hers. By the time we finished, the sun had started to dip below the horizon. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and purple, the light casting long shadows across the empty streets. The wards weren't perfect. No set of them ever was. But they'd be enough to hold for now. Sweat clung to my skin, and I wiped my brow as I stood back to assess the work. My eyes caught on something at the edge of the square, a weathered community board. It stood crooked, as if it had seen too many storms. Papers fluttered faintly in the evening breeze. I approached it slowly, my boots crunching on the gravel as I crossed the square. The board was covered in flyers, each one a plea for help, a snapshot of innocence lost. Smiling faces stared back at me, framed with names and dates. Children, all of them gone. McCarthy stood beside me, silent. He didn't need to say anything. The gravity of the situation hung in the air between us. We understood. The wards were just the beginning, but they mattered. Prep work always mattered more than the confrontation itself. It was the foundation, the difference between survival and death. Too many hunters these days forgot that. Too many paid the price for their recklessness. I turned back toward the truck, my steps steady and deliberate. There was more work to do, and no room for mistakes. The forest was quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed down on your ears and made you notice every snap of a twig beneath your boots. McCarthy followed close behind me, his breathing steady but tense. We stopped at the edge of the witch's yard, a clearing so small it almost seemed like an afterthought in the dense woods. The cabin sat in the middle, crooked and weathered, with a sagging roof and windows like empty eyes. It looked unremarkable, but I knew better. Wards buzzed faintly in the air, invisible to most, but tangible to someone like me. I knelt at the edge of the clearing, running my fingers over a line of blackened earth that ringed the yard. It wasn't just soil. Salt, ash, and ground bones were woven into the dirt, forming a barrier. Witches love their wards, and this one was no exception. Each knot was tied with care, meant for anyone foolish enough to get too close. McCarthy stood over me, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He was eager, impatient. I ignored him and focused on the work. Detangling wards wasn't a task you rushed. My fingers traced the pattern, searching for the anchor point. It was hidden beneath a cluster of twigs and leaves, a small charm fashioned from a bird's foot and a shard of glass. To the untrained eye, it looked like trash. To me, it was the key. I used the tip of my knife to sever the charm, breaking the ward. The air in the clearing shifted, growing heavier. We had an opening, but it wouldn't last long. Witches could feel when their wards were disturbed. I gestured for McCarthy to follow me, and we crossed the yard quickly. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, and we stepped inside. The space inside the cabin was far larger than it had any right to be. What should have been a single room stretched into a labyrinth of hallways and rooms. The walls pulsed faintly with energy, the residue of magic that twisted things. McCarthy looked around, wide-eyed, but I kept moving. A witch's house was designed to disorient, to make you lose your way. Hesitation was a death sentence here. I pointed out details as we went, things McCarthy would have missed. A pile of bones in the corner, deliberately arranged. The bones weren't just there for decoration. They were a focus point for her spells. I explained how witches hated children above all else. They couldn't create life themselves. And when they saw the innocence and the life of a child, they wanted to take it, to destroy it, and to make the child suffer. We moved quickly, our footsteps muffled by the thick, warped floorboards. The air smelled of decay and herbs, a mix that clung to the back of my throat. Every turn felt wrong, every doorway a trap waiting to spring. But I'd been in places like this before. I knew the signs. A faint glow at the end of a narrow hallway led us to a set of stairs. The basement. If the children were anywhere, it would be there. We descended carefully, each step groaning under our weight. The basement was dimly lit, with lanterns casting flickering light over the damp stone walls. And there they were, half a dozen children, still alive, thank God, huddled together in a corner. Their faces were pale, their clothes tattered, but they were alive. Relief hit me, but it was short-lived. A sharp caw rang out, loud and piercing. The crow. It perched on a beam above us, its black eyes gleaming with malice. Before I could act, it spread its wings, ready to signal its mistress. McCarthy moved faster than I expected. He drew a knife etched with runes, one of mine, and flung it with precision. The blade struck the crow, pinning it to the wood. The bird thrashed, and then it fell still. The air grew colder, heavier. The witch would feel this. She would know. "Time's up," I muttered, motioning for McCarthy to help get the kids. We didn't speak as we moved. Each child clung to us with trembling hands, their small bodies almost weightless. I carried one over my shoulder while guiding another by the hand. McCarthy took the rest. The house seemed to resist us as we made our way back. The hallways stretched longer. The doors shifted, but we pressed on. The wards I dismantled were still holding, though I could feel the witch's presence growing closer. We burst through the front door into the cool night air. The clearing felt oppressive now, as though the forest itself was watching us. We didn't stop to catch our breath. The kids were our priority. We made our way back to town as fast as we could, the protective wards around the square drawing closer with every step. The moment we crossed the boundary, the tension eased. The wards hummed faintly, their energy pushing back against the witch's power. The children clung to each other, their eyes darting nervously toward the woods. And then she appeared. She stood at the edge of the forest, her silhouette sharp against the moonlight. She didn't move. She didn't speak. But even at this distance, I could feel her anger. It radiated from her like heat. I stepped forward, just enough to make clear that I wasn't afraid. Our eyes met, and I saw the flicker of recognition in hers. She knew me. Even after all these years, she remembered. The witch didn't need to say a word. Her expression said everything. She knew she couldn't win. Not here. Not against two monster hunters and strong wards. She lingered for a moment longer, then turned and disappeared into the trees, her shadow swallowed by the night. I let out a slow breath, the tension in my shoulders easing. The wards had held, and the children were safe. We stayed in town that night. The children were reunited with their families, and the air felt lighter, as if the weight of the witch's presence had finally lifted. The townsfolk treated us like heroes. Handshakes, hugs, offers of food and drink. But I didn't feel like a hero. I was just tired. The mayor, a wiry man named Fletcher, with a gray mustache and kind eyes, insisted we stay at his house. He gave up his own bed for me and let McCarthy crash on the couch. Fletcher stayed up late with us, listening intently as I explained the protective wards we'd set around the square. I showed him where to strengthen them, where to set backups, and how to maintain them over time. Now, this isn't a one-and-done kind of thing, I began. Witches are patient. They wait for cracks, for weaknesses. You can't give them one opportunity, I told them, as I drew a rough map on the dining room table. They always come back to the same place. Always. They're drawn to it. If you can keep the ward strong, keep the defenses up, she'll go hungry, she'll weaken, and she'll starve. She won't die, but she'll be too weak to do much. Fletcher nodded solemnly. The next morning, we went through the town square again. McCarthy and I inspected the wards, reinforcing weak spots and walking Fletcher and a few others through the process. McCarthy worked quietly beside me. His movements were careful, more deliberate. He asked questions, real questions, the kind that showed he was starting to understand that monster hunting wasn't about bravado. By the time we were done, McCarthy looked over the town square and let out a slow breath. "It's solid. This'll hold," he said. "Thanks, Carver. I mean it. Thank you for everything." "All right, don't go soft on me now," I said. He grinned at that, and for the first time I thought maybe this kid would be okay. We left the town the next day. Fletcher and the others waved us off, their gratitude evident in every gesture. McCarthy drove and I let him. The long hours on the road passed in silence. I could see the gears turning in his head, the way his posture had shifted. The mission had changed him. When we finally reached the point where our paths diverged, McCarthy pulled over and turned to me. "You ever need anything, Carver, you let me know. I owe you," he said. I nodded. "Just don't get yourself killed, kid." As he pulled away, He waved once, but I waved back. The weeks that followed were quieter than usual. The pizzeria kept me busy enough, but my mind kept drifting back to the mission, to McCarthy, and to everything it stirred up. The organization had sent me letters before, asking me to come back as a mentor. I'd ignored them all, but now I found myself pulling the most recent one out of the drawer. It was straightforward. They wanted me to teach the new generation, young bloods like McCarthy. They needed someone to pass on the old ways, someone who understood that monster hunting wasn't about glory. I'd always dismissed the idea, convinced I was better off retired. But maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe there was still something I could do, even if I wasn't out in the field anymore. I thought about McCarthy, about how green he'd been when he walked into my pizzeria, and how much he'd learned in just a few days. Maybe I still had something to offer. The first day back at the organization was strange. The faces were younger, the tools shinier, but the core of it was all the same. The air smelled of salt, leather, and iron, a mix that instantly took me back to the old days. I walked through the halls with purpose, ignoring the curious glances from the rookies who whispered among themselves. The training room was where they told me to start. A group of recruits stood in a loose circle, their postures a mix of arrogance and unease. They reminded me of McCarthy on his first day, full of energy but clueless. I stepped into the center of the room, arms crossed, my expression set in stone. The chatter died instantly. They watched me, waiting. All right, listen up, young bloods. This is how you outsmart a witch. Hey, I'm Steven. I help write this story, and it is part of a much bigger world we're building. I just wanted to say thank you for all the encouragement. It's been really fun to be writing again. If you like scary true stories, check out our second channel, Lighthouse, where I'm on camera and I tell and react to scary true stories all the time. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you tomorrow night.